Welcome to Coast Talks, everyone. I'm Melody Pardo, and I work with Canada's Ocean Supercluster. As I join you today from Nova Scotia, I respectfully acknowledge these lands as the unceded traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I would also like to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands from coast to coast to coast, the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call these lands and waters home. Coast is committed to working with First Nations and to respecting their long-standing relationships to the lands and waters. Coast recognizes the leadership of Indigenous peoples as innovators and stewards of these territories. I invite everyone joining today to take a moment to reflect on the territory from which you are joining today's conversation. For those new to Coast Talks, COAST stands for the Center for Ocean Applied Sustainable Technologies, a new blue tech innovation hub based in Victoria, BC. COAST's mission is to drive inclusive prosperity in British Columbia's sustainable blue economy through entrepreneurship, innovation, and expansive partnerships. The Coast Talk series was launched to showcase some of the organizations, innovators, and companies working hard to build a sustainable ocean future. Today's talk is the first of season 2. You can sign up for upcoming talks on our website, canadacoast.ca, and view past talks there and of course on YouTube. It's World Ocean Day, and it's my honor to participate in the incredible work happening in Canada, where we're tackling some of the biggest threats and challenges to our ocean, while also creating significant and sustainable economic growth in the process. We know the sustainable development of our ocean is one of the most important opportunities of our time. Canada's Ocean Supercluster's 500 members from across the country are delivering solutions that will help decarbonize marine activity, transition energy, leverage digital technologies to better understand what's happening in our oceans, monitor the health of our ocean environment and its species, keep our workers safe while reducing their footprint, and building a skilled, inclusive workforce for the future economy. I'll place my contact info in the Zoom chat if anyone would like to connect to learn more about the Ocean Supercluster and of course, COAST. The UN Decade of Ocean has created an important platform to bring people together, just as we are together today, to create awareness and inspire action. Thank you so much for joining us. It's my pleasure to introduce our event moderator, Rebecca Martone, who is the Executive Director of the Tula Foundation's Ocean Decade Collaborative Center for the Northeast Pacific. Over the past 20 years, Dr. Martone has worked as an applied marine ecologist, addressing a variety of issues in coastal ecosystems across the west coast of North America, including marine spatial planning, small-scale fishery sustainability, cumulative impacts on coastal ecosystems, and monitoring to inform ecosystem-based management. Rebecca is passionate about working with a diverse community of scientists, community members, industry representatives, and ocean and coastal practitioners to solve the major challenges facing our oceans and help protect our coasts and oceans while supporting people's livelihoods and cultural connections. Rebecca, over to you.
Thank you so much, Melody. I'm just going to share my screen here. So thanks so much, Melody, and to the COAST team for the opportunity to present to all of you and all of you for attending today. As Melody said, I'll be moderating a session today, but before we hear from a group of distinguished panelists, I'm going to take some time to help orient you to the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. We're collectively trying to achieve and introduce our Ocean Decade Collaborative Center for the Northeast Pacific Ocean. But first, I'd like to say that I'm joining you today with gratitude from the traditional territory of the Hokominum speaking peoples of the Cowichan on Vancouver Island. So we are one of the few decade collaborative centers that are the first to be endorsed by the UN International Oceanographic Commission under UNESCO in support of the Ocean Decade. As of today, actually, here on World Oceans Day, we're very excited to announce that we are officially part of the UN Ocean Decade. And as a regional collaborative center, our aim is to make the Ocean Decade a success in the Northeast Pacific. Our region depicted here includes the coastal and open ocean of the US and Canadian West Coasts, from Alaska to California and everything in between, with extensions to Baja California and Hawaii as we move through the decade. So first, what is the Ocean Decade? So in 2018, the UN, through UNESCO, designated the decade of 2021 to 2030 as the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. It's led globally by the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, and the vision is the science we need for the ocean we want. And so really it's about ocean science that is fit for purpose. And I should say here that science is very broadly defined. It is physical and natural sciences, the social sciences, but also indigenous and local knowledge. So it's really the knowledge we need for the ocean we want. And the mission is to catalyze transformative ocean science for solutions for sustainable development, connecting people and our ocean. So this really means mobilizing scientists, community, industry, and government to address critical priorities and needs of the oceans and the people that rely on them. It's about synthesizing knowledge and identifying knowledge gaps to help guide research that's solutions focused and contributes to a wide variety of solutions, such as policy solutions, but also technology development and innovation. And it's about co-designing and co-delivering knowledge in that multi-stakeholder environment. So to really implement that mission and to identify and develop the transformative science we need to move from the ocean we have to the ocean we want, first we have to define what is it that we want to achieve. So the UN Ocean Decade global community identified 7 Ocean Decade outcomes that depict the ocean that we want. These are things like a clean ocean where sources of pollution are identified and removed, a healthy and resilient ocean where marine ecosystems are mapped and protected, a safe ocean where people are protected from ocean-related hazards, as well as several others. And in order to get these outcomes, we need to tackle the major challenges that face the oceans. There have been 10 that have been identified by the global community as part of the Ocean Decade. So for example, protecting and restoring ecosystems and biodiversity, sustainably feeding the global population, developing a sustainable and equitable ocean economy, which we've heard from Melody, is a real aim of COAST, and also developing skills, knowledge, and technology for all. And I want to note that, these are the challenges I've laid out here, but all of this information can be found on the Ocean Decade implementation website through their implementation plan, and I can share that link later in the chat if that's helpful. So this is the framework that they've set out in that implementation plan, and it really highlights the fact that in order to get these outcomes and overcome these challenges, we need to work through this knowledge to action framework. So it's about identifying what we know, what we need to know to inform sustainable solutions, to generate knowledge and understanding through synthesis or bringing together different forms of knowledge, collecting new information, and then ultimately increasing the use of that knowledge to help inform solutions. And this really does require collaboration, co-designing and co-delivering science or knowledge, and keeping in mind the aspects of transformative science, but also the ideas of incorporating justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in everything we do in the ocean. So today we're going to be hearing from some projects that are aiming to tackle the major challenges, that are working on delivery of science for solutions, and we're excited to have them participate in the conversation today. I wanted to also just quickly explain how the Ocean Decade approaches tackling these objectives. So these are these decade actions, which are tangible initiatives that help to meet the objectives and move us from the ocean we have to the ocean we want. And so these decade actions get endorsed by the UN Ocean Decade through a process developed by the Decade Coordination Unit through the UN and the Decade Advisory Board. There's a lot of jargon around the Ocean Decade, but ultimately, this is really about being part of a global community, and getting endorsed means getting recognition. And so in 2020 or 2021, they did the first round of endorsements. They had endorsed 30 global programs and many different projects. And they had a recent announcement today, actually, of 4 new global programs and 40 new projects around the globe, including several in our region. So these global programs tend to be large in scope. They tend to tackle multiple challenges. And so then they look for projects at regional projects or local projects that can help implement their vision and really bring together multiple parties in this multi-institutional, interdisciplinary, collaborative space. And I think mostly it's important to know that there is an actual process to be part of the Ocean Decade, but ultimately the spirit is here today to really think about how do we start to catalyze some of this new work in our region here in the Northeast Pacific. There is a third call that's recently been open. It's open until October 2022 with a focus on Challenge 3, Sustainable Blue Food, and Challenge 4, Sustainable Ocean Economy. All of this information can be found on the UN Decade Ocean Forum website, and you can sign up to be part of the Global Stakeholder Forum and find more information on how to submit projects for endorsement. And that's something we can talk more about if there's any questions today, or you can contact me in the future. I should also say that in addition to these global programs and projects that have this regular call, there are ways to get involved in the Ocean Decade through activities and contributions, which are done on a more rolling basis. So what does endorsement mean? Why be part of the Ocean Decade? There isn't funding associated necessarily. It doesn't come from the UN, but it does bring formal recognition when you are endorsed. And this allows it to be amplified, to make it attractive to funders, and to leverage global and regional networks and communication channels. It also serves as an umbrella for and strengthens international and multi-stakeholder collaboration, which sometimes is hard to do without some kind of umbrella. And it really is about elevating the voices of some of the voices that we don't usually hear, and to really integrate different points of view. Ultimately, the aim is to accelerate solutions in the face of rapid change. And we're hoping that we can be a big supporter of that here in our region. And so I just wanted to put this up to show that, again, our aim is to make the Ocean Decade a success. And so our mandate is about, taking multiple steps in this arena about catalyzing new projects and activities, facilitating knowledge co-production, supporting stakeholder coordination and engagement, and building broad public awareness of the Ocean Decade. So that's the spirit we come with today. And we're really excited to hear from projects doing really neat work in this region, and hopefully think about ways we might start to pull together collaborations under the Ocean Decade. So lastly, I just want to say we're excited to invite you to get involved and stay connected with us. You can find our contact information here. You can go to our website, oceandecadenortheastpacific.org, and we'll be helping to connect folks to the Ocean Decade, and hope that you'll get in touch and join our network. So I'll stop there, and I will invite invite Ben to put up the next slide so we can move forward into our discussion. That's great. Thanks, Ben. So I'm delighted to moderate this discussion with our 3 distinguished panelists who are going to lead us off with some short presentations, and then we'll have a moderated discussion. We're going to be taking your questions, so please submit them anytime through the Zoom Q&A, or you can also introduce yourselves in the chat. This session is going to be recorded, and you can submit your questions anonymously if you prefer in the Q&A. With that, I will say welcome to all of our panelists. We're going to start out hearing from Ann Webster. Ann has a background in physics and a desire to work on challenging problems. She began her career in remote sensing back in 2005. Developing change detection analytics using aerial and satellite images. She's developed and led approaches to detect small objects, classify land cover, and find the anomalous in scenes captured from optical, multispectral, hyperspectral, and thermal infrared stills and video. She's recently led the research and development of several AI-based solutions, including classifying ships and detecting floating ocean plastic litter from spaceborne sensors. Since joining HATFIELD, she's been managing the development of the Smart Whales space-based detection system, which she'll talk more about today. So I'll welcome Anne, who's here representing HATFIELD, and I'll say that she's also presenting on behalf of Oliver Olivier Tsui, who's also here and joining us as part of the panel. Take it away, Anne.
Great, thank you so much, Rebecca. Okay, so before I talk about smart whales, let me first briefly introduce HATFIELD. So HATFIELD is a fully independent owner-operated company focused on providing high-quality environmental and social science services. We take a collaborative client and value-focused approach to our projects. Our geomatics group provides scientific and strategic support in remote sensing to a range of national and international organizations like the Canadian Space Agency, the European Space Agency, the World Bank, United Nations, and others. We have expertise in developing solutions based on data from optical and radar satellites, from airborne LiDAR, and from data that comes from drones. And we provide products and analyses to monitor ecosystem recovery and to assist in sustainable development, both on land and on the coast. So let's talk whales. You may not have heard about the North Atlantic right whale. It's an endangered species, only about 336 left in the world. They spend their summer in Canadian waters. And in recent years, they've shifted their locations due to climate change and its impact on their food source. So they were traditionally mostly in the Bay of Fundy, but now they're in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and in very busy areas. So they're highly impacted by entanglement in fishing gear or by vessel strikes. There have been significant efforts to help conserve and monitor these animals, including by the Government of Canada, who set vessel speed reduction zones, and they trigger fishing closures when a whale is spotted. The current monitoring is performed by visual assessment in planes or on vessels, and also with underwater microphones to detect them by their calls. So here's an example of the Government of Canada's Whale Insight, which aggregates the visual and acoustic sightings. The ones shown here are from the last 2 weeks. These monitoring methods are great, but it helps to include other ways to cover the large area more often to get more information. And it's possible to detect whales from satellite images to support what's currently being done. So the growing space industry has several current and upcoming satellites that will have the capacity to see the whales and offer good coverage, although it's for a snapshot in time as the satellites pass overhead. And though the whales are big to us, they're still tiny compared to these images and the area being monitored. So as an example, here in orange is a box of a typical very high resolution optical image footprint, so a single image. That strip would be about 100 kilometers long. And for scale, we can see this would be a 10-kilometer square and a 1-kilometer square, and now a 250-meter square. And it's really at this point where we can start to see objects like small vessels or whales. So with this amount of data, it's really important to have an automated solution to save the hours it would take to go through it and find these whales. So HATFIELD is developing the Smart Whales space-based detection system to do just that, to automatically process these optical satellite data and to find the whales. We do this using state-of-the-art deep learning convolutional neural networks to tell them apart from ice or boats or other floating things. When the first version is complete in early 2024, we plan for the system to be able to task different satellites when appropriate, and then process the data automatically when received and report the detections, locations, and confidences through a graphical interface, but also provide the information in a way that can be incorporated into other monitoring tools like Whale Insight. So we're currently in the second of 3 years of development. And at this stage, we have our first prototype processing pipeline with algorithms to detect a few types of whales based on some training data from around the world. And activities this year include testing current performance on the new data we've acquired in Cape Cod and in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and then continuing to improve the approach and refine the whale classification and the confidences. The Smart Whales initiative is funded by the Canadian Space Agency with support from Transport Canada and Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And I'd like to mention that we're very appreciative of the members in our consortium developing this solution, namely Alta ML for their AI development team, Dr. Kimberly Davies and her lab at the University of New Brunswick, Dr. Sean Brillant and the Canadian Wildlife Federation, and Dr. David Johnson and his group at Duke University. Their support and knowledge has been essential, and it really demonstrates how multidisciplinary teams can make progress together in protecting the ocean. So thank you, and I look forward to further discussion.
Thank you very much, Anne. We're going to hear now from Eddie Bernard, Dr. Eddie Bernard with Survival Capsule. Eddie is a subject matter expert and consultant on issues dealing with tsunami warning systems, tsunami mitigation and education programs, and tsunami research. Dr. Bernard is currently conducting research for Survival Capsule LLC, teaches tsunami awareness through the University of Hawaii's National Disaster Preparedness Training Center, and provides consulting services for governments, academia, and the private sector. As former director of NOAA's Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory in the US for 30 years, he directed a broad range of oceanographic research programs at PMEL, including ocean climate dynamics, fisheries oceanography, El Nino forecasts, tsunamis, and underwater volcanoes. So I'll hand it over to Eddie and also say that his colleague Julian Barbier is here as well. And we part of that, or excuse me, Julian Sharp, that was Julian Barbier is part of the Ocean Decade. I'm getting my names mixed up. Julian Sharp is also here and would be joining the panel. I'll let you go ahead, Eddie. Eddie, I don't think we can hear you. Are you muted, Eddie?
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, as Rebecca mentioned, safe ocean is one of the 7 outcomes of the Ocean Decade. And one of the main social outcomes from this decade is a project that's already been approved by the decade, and that's to have 100% of communities at risk of tsunami prepared for and resilient to tsunamis. This program has been tagged and named Tsunami Ready, which means any community that has identified, they have to identify the tsunami hazard zones, and they need to hold drills to evacuate these hazardous areas before the next tsunami arrives. This is a very ambitious program because the United Nations estimates that over 600 million people worldwide live in coastal flooding hazard zones. Now, this is a global perspective. Now let's go down to the regional perspective, where here in the Northwest, we have a significant tsunami hazard posed by the Cascadia subduction zone. And this subduction zone doesn't recognize national boundaries, so it's a threat to both British Columbia and Washington, Oregon, and California. Fortunately, in the last 2 decades, the Northwest has been preparing for this eventual earthquake and tsunami, and they've had extensive hazard maps made. And here's an example of a tsunami evacuation map for Tofino. And if you look at these maps, you can see that the brown area is the area that's expected to be flooded, and the green area is safe refuge at a higher elevation so that you can escape the flooding. One of the characteristics of tsunamis are they're killers. For every 3 people that die in a tsunami, only 1 person is injured. So the likelihood of survival, if you're in the tsunami, is very low. Now, now that they've identified these areas, you can see there's a lot of brown area there. And in order for people to get from certain areas, it's several miles and may take up to 20 or 30 minutes to evacuate. Unfortunately, the tsunami will arrive in about 20 or 30 minutes in this location, based on projections of that tsunami. So presently, there are 2 types of evacuations available. Horizontal, where you run, hope you get to high ground and before the tsunami arrives, and 2 vertical, in the event that there isn't high ground available to you. Now, unfortunately, there are some problems with both of these. Both horizontal evacuations and vertical evacuations means that some people will be unable to evacuate. Either they're disabled or need assistance, they're too far from their residence, too much time to evacuate. And in the case of vertical ones, maybe it would exceed capacity, or there might be fires. However, an under-researched aspect of evacuation is people unwilling to evacuate. They may not trust the warning information. They may fear disease or bad guys at these shelters. They may fear structural failure of a tower. And of course, these shelters do not allow pets, and many people want to protect their pets as much as themselves. So as a result of this, it's projected that between 3 and 25% of the exposed population will probably die from the next tsunami, because once you're engulfed in the tsunami, your chances of survival are very small. A third option is a shelter in place, where you can have immediate access. Evacuation time is less than a minute, and it's located at your residence or business, but it must protect you from the following hazards of the tsunami: drowning, being hit or crushed by floating objects, being burned by fires, being exposed to cold water, or swallowing toxic dirt mixed with tsunami water, and contagious diseases that might be found at the shelters. Survival Capsule has designed a shelter-in-place capsule, specifically designed, analyzed, and tested using aerospace engineering technology to protect occupants from tsunami forces. It's watertight. It floats to protect from drowning, being crushed or hit by floating objects, or ingesting silt-laden water. This aircraft-grade aluminum that the capsule is made from is the same type of aluminum that is put on the wings when you fly around the world. So this protects you from being crushed, punctured, or fires. It's insulated, protects you from cold water or fires, and has storage for personal items, food, and water, provides shelter for after tsunami subsides, and that means you're not exposed to diseases. So if you have any questions, or if you want to visit our website, survivalcapsule.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eddie. I also just want to remind all of our participants, feel free to add any Q&A, any questions you might have in the chat or in the Q&A session of the webinar. And we have one more speaker we're going to hear from today, Dr. Anna Pasaka. Anna is the Chief Scientific Officer at Ocean Diagnostics, Inc., which is a Canadian environmental impact company on a mission to protect the environment from plastic pollution and biodiversity loss. An ocean scientist by background, Anna has been researching microplastic pollution with regulators, academia, apparel companies, environmental NGOs, and the public since 2018. Her work includes studies on the role of textiles in microfiber pollution, microplastics in wastewater systems, and the Arctic food web, and community science tools for microplastics. Anna's research has been featured in Canadian and international media, and she regularly provides expertise in support of policy development and other solutions. Thank you so much, Anna. We'll hear from you now.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you to the organizers of the Coast Talks for the opportunity to share on the work that we do at Ocean Diagnostics. I hope you can all hear me, and I'm just about to share my presentation. Excellent. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity to join this exciting discussion. Ocean Diagnostics is a Canadian company based on Vancouver Island. We were founded in 2018 with an initial goal of developing enabling technologies that would allow others, such as scientists, government agencies, and even the public, to better measure plastic pollution in our environment and to find solutions. Now, plastic pollution and biodiversity loss, which are two interconnected issues and represent two planetary threats, are global, of course, complex, and arise from systemic issues. Therefore, it is important that solutions and actions to these problems involve all levels of our society and occur across different scales, geographical scales, from local to national to international. Unfortunately, the resources and capacity needed to do that are largely missing. And so our company addresses this issue in the following ways. We develop and deploy technologies that help to advance microplastic and environmental DNA sample collection, analysis, monitoring, and data visualization. We provide and constantly expand our laboratory capabilities to quantify and characterize plastics and microplastics and fibers in environmental samples, to track their sources and understand their pathways and impacts in the environment. We form collaborations with stakeholders in different areas to change the paradigm of plastic pollution and address biodiversity threats. And last but certainly not least, we see the public as an important participation of the members of the public as a key opportunity and factor in helping us to overcome these challenges. And we see their role in research and solution building as important. And we're developing tools that would help them to do that and provide the data that is needed to inform decision-making at both local and larger scales. And with that in mind, I'd like to highlight our latest project on community science in partnership with Environment and Climate Change Canada and 51 volunteers on Vancouver Island, where we developed new technology, AI-based technology that helps community scientists to collect and analyze microplastics, pardon me, on local shorelines. This technology was tested and deployed in a 6-month project that allowed local volunteers to assess hotspots of microplastics and their sources, and resulted in the most extensive data set on shoreline microplastics. The project was done, it included a national campaign to engage the Canadian public on the issue of plastic pollution in collaboration with 12 Canadian experts and scientists who shared the research and stories on how plastics and microplastics affect the environment, our economy, and what are the implications for our health. And it resulted in the development of a community science toolkit that includes field protocols, technology, open source database, as well as educational and advocacy materials to ultimately help the communities to generate the data on the state of microplastic pollution in their community, but also to share that data with the global community and advocate for change. And I would just like to acknowledge and thank all of our partners who have helped either to build our technologies and deploy them and test them in the field. And that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. So now I'd like to, we're going to move into the discussion and Q&A portion of the discussion today. And I wonder if we could invite all of the our panelists to turn on their video. It seems like we have a shy audience. We don't have a lot of questions in our Q&A session, but luckily I have quite a few discussion items for us all queued up. So maybe I'll start with saying thank you all so much for participating. It's really interesting to hear such a wide array of challenges being tackled, and but interestingly, you're all using technology to apply, developing and implementing technology to solve some of these ocean challenges. And I'm wondering, are there other applications for the technology that you've showcased? How can they be harnessed both to solve the problems you've described, but maybe to also solve other problems? And maybe I'll ask Julian and Eddie first, because you've mentioned to me before that you've had other folks come up and identify ways that the survival capsule can be used for a safe ocean.
Yeah, I'm happy to field that one. My name is Julian Sharp. I work with Dr. Reddy at Survival Capsule. We're based in Mukilteo, which is on the land of the Snohomish tribe, for which we're grateful. I think Mukilteo means good camping ground. We initially started out with Survival Capsule as a tsunami mitigation system, but have rapidly come to realize that it has many other uses, some of which we're working with partnerships on. So for example, we've got a number of customers from the East Coast who see this as a form of hurricane mitigation rather than move away from the hurricane zone. They want to stay local, protect their property, protect their business. You know, sometimes the hurricane changes direction, so it'll be a last line of defense for them. And then, of course, when the hurricanes pass, they can get to their property and repair and pull things together quickly. Another partnership, we're working with Fox TV on a new TV show that's going to be announced soon. I think we're on target to make them 22 custom capsules. This would fall in the category of entertainment, which is not what we originally envisaged, but it's certainly an opportunity for us to develop our product, put it through extreme events, and of course, get wide publicity. We have worked in Japan a lot ever since we started, in fact, so we have a good partnership with the Japanese. They, of course, are very interested in Survival Capsule as a tsunami shelter-in-place device. And we hope to start production in Japan early next year in 2023. We have already built 5, but we're going to expand that quite considerably. So that's kind of an example of where we started out in one direction, and we've come across multiple other uses, which of course benefit Survival Capsule.
Great, thanks so much, Julian. And maybe I'll ask Anne and Olivier to respond to that question as well. And then we have some questions that are coming up in the chat and the Q&A, which I'll turn to in a few minutes.
Sure, thanks. So for smart whales, right now the focus is on the North Atlantic right whale. However, of course, this can be expanded and applied to other types of marine mammals and other whales. So in the Pacific, of course, perhaps the southern resident orcas that are also endangered, in the Arctic regions, the belugas, that kind of thing for sure, with an expansion of the algorithm development. I think another thing about, remote sensing from satellites in general is a bit, so not just the object detection, but if we move more towards the spectral information that you can get from some of these satellites as well, there's definitely monitoring the coastal habitats, and even the value of satellite data, of course, is the ocean is so vast and wide, but satellites go over it very frequently, and so you can get the information that you can't be able to get otherwise. So there's definitely some opportunities there. I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything to that, Olivia.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say in terms of the other applications of remote sensing data and satellite data, not just on the detection of marine mammals, but there's application of, for example, detection of shorebirds using high resolution imagery on coastal intertidal zones. But other data sets revolving around perhaps ocean temperatures, ocean color, mapping or understanding the algal blooms that are happening in our oceans. So there's definitely a lot of applications in remote sensing, and with the new and upcoming sensors that are becoming available as technology advances, such as hyperspectral data, so another form of optical remote sensing where you are able to capture more information on the electromagnetic spectrum part, opens up a large area in terms of oceans applications, basically, or studies.
Great, thanks so much. I see a couple of questions here that kind of are related in terms of applying these technologies. So one would be a question for you, Anne and Olivier, around the technology. Is it ever used by the military, or what are some of the other ways that these satellite data are used that maybe bring up some other challenges or issues or concerns, I think.
Happy to field that, I guess. Just recently, actually, there was an announcement or a call as part of the Defense Research and Defense Canada organization for innovative solutions to support detection of marine mammals in a more real-time fashion. All marine mammals. So just to give some context, the military does use active sonar operations, and they want to know how they can mitigate their operations related to marine mammals. So they are actively looking into this as well in terms of being able to leverage satellite data, and not just satellite data, but integration of all sensors so that they're getting accurate detections of marine species that might be affected by their operations.
That's great.
A related application, I think, too, is illegal fishing. So that's another big aspect to the oceans, and being able to detect vessels in different ways from different modalities, and then tracking them and seeing when they're not reporting where they say they are, or these kind of suspicious activities can be discovered and help the ocean in that way as well.
We have some really great questions in here. Thank you both so much. I'm trying to be judicious in how we spread them out. There's lots of kind of ones we could continue on, but maybe one for Anna that's come up. Do you see any emergent compliance requirements for microplastics in certain industries? You know, whether wastewater, effluent, beverage manufacturers. And so if that's so, is the technology there to have any meaningful compliance programs? And I think this kind of leads to that, like there's the technological innovation piece, but the solution side of things, which we've heard a little bit about from others, but maybe you could speak to that side of the marine pollution side.
For sure. Thank you for that question. I think so there's a technical gap when it comes to compliance, but also our understanding on the sources and the types, and really the methods to actually analyze microplastics are still need a lot of work. However, it is important that we start measuring and monitoring these contaminants regularly so that we can inform how to control and what sort of targets we should be aiming for when it comes to reduction, what to base that on. In terms of regulations and sort of how different jurisdictions are approaching that, state of California has recently mandated to monitor microplastics in drinking water. So in that location, at least, they're advancing sort of the monitoring and research to really inform on how to control those contaminants. But there's still kind of a lot of work that we need to do in order to really have more effective ways of quantifying microplastic sources and their distribution in environmental samples. But I view this as a very important solution to the problem of microplastics, for sure.
Thanks so much, Anna. Maybe kind of on a slightly different note, I mean, there's one question in here really around the satellite-based identification of monitoring systems impacting the current roles of marine biologists and marine mammal observers, what the skill sets are that are in demand. But maybe I'll also expand that more broadly. You know, what are those maybe key challenges and opportunities for these coastal industries, businesses, technology sectors that can be tackled to improve sustainability and support the blue economy? So in this case, it's a challenge. You know, are we seeing that there needs to be a big shift in the workforce or the skill sets that are in demand, whereas others, you know, other types of opportunities are, you know, really about investing in the local sector to enhance, you know, these kinds of activities, you know, for example, with the survival capsules, creating a whole new industry potentially, and expanding this technology into other arenas. So I wonder if I could ask, you know, Anne and Olivier to respond to that specific question around workforce, but then open it up more broadly to this idea of, you know, some of those other challenges or opportunities you see to mobilize this sector.
Sure, that's an interesting question. I think that our partners, specifically the Kimberly Davies, Dr. Davies and Dr. Brillant, have been, they're marine biologists and oceanographers. Their experience and their knowledge has been vital within our project. Their students have been vital as well. I think that from my perspective, we still will definitely need marine biologists and to do the field work and to validate the products and the products and solutions that remote sensing data comes out with. And I think it's there is definitely a need and a how do you say, a requirement on the AI side of things. It's a very high demand type of position right now, but I think there's also a need for the discipline knowledge specifically for marine biology that they bring together. So the collaboration is key between the two positions.
Thanks so much for that, Olivier. Maybe anybody else has any comments about, generally these challenges or opportunities? I mean, there's some other questions maybe related, like applications for life rafts aboard commercial and recreational vessels for survival capsules, for example. As an example of ways that you might expand or increase the opportunity for building out this kind of technology. Oh, Julian, you're speaking, but you're muted.
Hate it when that happens. As far as opportunities, in terms of survival capsules, as I mentioned before, we're seeing more and more varied opportunities. We've actually been invited to the Monte Carlo boat show 3 times in a row now. It's not our top priority, luxury ocean going vessels, but we've had a lot of interest in these hard shell strap-in devices, which would replace the current floatable rafts, which you're not secured in, purely because when you come off the crest of a 60-foot wave in one of those rafts, you're likely to break bones or even be killed. So that's another area that we hadn't foreseen, and we may investigate at some point once we've got the main focus rolling. But as far as opportunities, yes, the survival capsule will generate a lot of industrial opportunities for the areas in which these capsules are needed. And what I mean by that is that currently survival capsules very much a Pacific Northwest product. We spin hemispheres in BC, in Vancouver. We bring in components from Oregon and we assemble in Seattle. Japan will assemble products for Japan and the surrounding market, and source components locally. We'll of course ship them until they're ready to source locally. And other areas will also have the opportunity to assemble these products because they're not particularly transportation friendly. We have various sizes, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 16 person. So they take a lot of volume in terms of transport. So assembling in the local area is a very good way of producing employment for local citizens.
Great, thanks so much. That's a great perspective. And I think it answered a couple of other questions that folks had for you. So that's good. I'm going to shift it now and ask Anna, there's a question here. Plastics pollution is such a high visibility issue. And I think this gets to that idea of partnerships and collaboration, but also citizens and engaging people in the ocean decade broadly. She's really, this is from Heather Murray from Canoe. She says, it's great to hear about your community science initiative. Are your toolkits readily available to schools and other organizations? And is there a cost? And then do the toolkits include solutions-based activities to balance the potentially alarming analytical data? Which I think is a really interesting perspective that sometimes we forget that, by bringing up these challenges, we can sometimes cause emotional emotional concerns or where our planet is headed, and that idea of hope is an important piece of the puzzle. So if maybe you could speak to that.
Sure. Thank you, Heather, for that question. So the toolkits, yes, they will be available they are aimed at schools and beach cleanup organizations, but anyone can acquire one. However, we believe that it's really the youth and the young people that, they're going to be on this planet and will be affected by these issues. So it's important that we arm them with the right knowledge, with the tools that help them to be engaged in the process of solution building and inspire change. And to the question around, and so, sorry, to backtrack actually, so the toolkit will be available for distribution end of this summer, early autumn. And if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. I will leave my email as well in the chat box, so you can get in touch with us, and we'd love to hear about your needs and how you can use it in your community. In terms of the use of the data and solution building, this is something that we spend a lot of time thinking about. And I also believe that the plastic pollution can be a very overwhelming problem. There are many sources. There is global action that needs to happen, but there's also local action that needs to happen. How do we focus the public attention on the right solutions, but also help them understand how the solutions have a global impact, connect to a global change. So for the toolkit, what we've done is we've focused on we've applied more of a local lens to data interpretation, and it's really focused on learning about the different sources and how to engage with local decision makers on finding solutions, how to write a letter to your MP, how to there's also an open source database that allows you to connect to other communities, and sort of engaging in the process of data discussion and interpretation is just as valuable as not necessarily having all of the answers and being able to do it fully. And I think something that is missing from a lot of the citizen science programs, especially when it comes to microplastics and plastics, because they are so difficult to measure and study, that participation of the public in the science often ends after sample collection. So there's very little opportunities to see the steps after that and participate in those steps after that. So the way we address that is we provide some tools to do science on your own and think about how that can relate to your community, and then connect with the relevant stakeholders to work on solutions. But we're also connecting people across Canada, from researchers to water authorities and the communities, so that they can exchange the knowledge and hopefully move towards solutions together.
That's great. I mean, that's a huge
Hopefully
part
that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I mean, it really does, and also embody the spirit of the Ocean Decade, to mobilize people to participate, to accelerate towards solutions, and to create those networks. I'd say just, in terms of the Ocean Decade, another thing to think about, and we don't have a lot of time left, but maybe a really quick answer from each of you of, how can we better kind of harness this work and get it connected to the Ocean Decade? I don't know if you have that, but the idea is, some of the work you're doing can be scaled up or harnessed and promoted in a way that, allows us to amplify all this neat work under the Ocean Decade. So I'll leave you with thinking about that, or if you have some comments about how you think the Ocean Decade could be useful to you, maybe just a few word answer. I'll start with maybe with Eddie and Julian.
Well, I just say that based on the 20 years of experience and advances in tsunami preparedness in the Northwest region, I think this is a golden opportunity for the regional decade to contribute to the global problem, because as these communities start to identify their hazard zones, they're going to identify people who can't escape. And so we have a 20-year head start that could help these other countries. And like Julian mentioned, it's a modular system, so it could be used in all kinds of ways to sustain development. It could be used to save lives. And speaking of that, probably the biggest problem with a natural disaster is that many communities never recover. They're gone. And so if you're talking about resilience, and if you're talking about sustainability, you need people alive. And focusing on saving lives for all these great ideas we have for the coastline, everybody wants to live on the coast for good reasons. It's a beautiful place, wonderful. And, projections are that by the year 2050, 1 billion people will live within 10 meters of sea level. 1 billion people. So if you start to think about that problem, how many lives can we save and keep those communities from becoming impoverished or disappearing after a natural disaster? So let's try to prepare a little bit better, bounce back quickly, have everybody save so they can contribute to the rebuilding.
That's a really great answer, Eddie. Thank you so much. Anybody else want to reflect on ways we might build from what you're doing and or help support, amplifying the work you're doing here in this region?
Yeah, just a few words. I think there's a lot of activity and a lot of research that's happening within the, at least on the remote sensing side of things, on understanding habitats, monitoring it, and mapping it. And I think facilitation of collaboration between groups is a key aspect, because everyone's doing interesting work and everyone is progressing the science, moving along the science, but we want to try to avoid duplication. So, if we can coordinate and communicate what we're doing, we can get there faster, essentially.
Yeah, the importance of collaboration and communication, and really, absolutely. I totally hear that. Anna, do you have any reflections you'd like to share? And then I'll hand it over to Ben to close us out. Oh, you're muted.
It was Anna, and I got a little distracted by the chat there. But I would say, creating spaces that allow us to share knowledge, creating platforms that allow for real-time communication, making sure that we're not duplicating our efforts, and maintaining the dialogue and engagement. I think something that can be a challenge to plastic pollution and in the context of the public is we're in this for a long haul. So how do we keep people motivated, and how do we track our progress so that we feel like we're moving forward and we're not stuck? So that's something I constantly think about, and I love to speak to people about that and how the different ways in which we can communicate our science and translate it to action and keep the momentum going.
That's great. And I would like to say thank you to everyone who's in the audience that's contributed questions that we didn't get to today. There are a lot of great ones in there, and perhaps we can take a little time to respond to them at some point. I don't know how we would do that, but we really appreciate your enthusiasm and participation. And I'll say thank you to the Coast team for inviting us and for the wonderful panelists here today. And I'll hand it over to Ben.
Yeah, thank you to the speakers and the audience for joining today's conversation. You can learn more about Coast at canadacoast.ca. There you'll find information about upcoming events, recordings of previous talks, and information on how to become a member. Associate membership is free, so please join us in building Pacific Canada's hub for the sustainable blue economy. Thank you.